Another boatload of suspected asylum seekers has been intercepted off Ashmore Island. The Navy patrol boat HMAS Ararat intercepted the vessel yesterday afternoon. The boat, carrying 34 passengers and 4 crew, had been detected by a maritime patrol aircraft. And the Sri Lankan High Commissioner says the asylum seekers on the Oceanic Viking are an embarrassment. He's also warned that Tamil Tiger fighters may be on board. The 78 asylum seekers are still refusing to disembark, saying they don't want to be processed in Indonesia. But the government is playing down the prospect of forcibly removing them from the ship.
The Foreign Minister is hopeful Australian officials can convince the Sri Lankans to leave the Oceanic Viking peacefully.
We want this to be civilised, we want it to be dignified, and we're using every effort to try and make that the outcome.
In the past, military force has been used to remove asylum seekers from Australian vessels, but Stephen Smith told Sky News at this stage it's not an option.
I'm not talking in terms of a forcible removal. The regrettable history in these matters shows that the extent to which avenues like that are resorted to, they invariably lead to bad outcomes.
The opposition is divided over how Kevin Rudd should solve the impasse.
He can see the problem. He can ask the army to go up there and take those people off.
It doesn't seem like a very sensible suggestion to me, but it's up to Mr Rudd to decide how he's going to handle this situation.
These people are guests on our boat, and if they won't behave themselves, I suspect they eventually should be kindly escorted off.
Indonesia has an abundance of patience in handling these matters. Australia also has great patience in handling these complex matters.
The Rudd government isn't alone in wanting this situation resolved quickly. The Sri Lankan High Commissioner has told Sky News that the asylum seekers on board the Oceanic Viking are embarrassing his country.
Our only concern is that the good name and reputation of Sri Lanka is being tarnished by these asylum seekers.
And he's put Australia on notice, warning Tamil Tiger fighters are likely to be on board boats heading for our waters.
I think that will pose a threat to the peace and security of Australia.
The head of Melbourne University's prestigious law school has quit to champion global reforms on protecting refugees after criticising the Rudd government's so-called Indonesia solution. Earlier this month, Professor James Hathaway accused the Australian government of paying Indonesia to do its dirty work, and he joins us now from Melbourne. Professor, thanks for your time. Can you explain your decision to leave your post early then?
Well, I think every academic administrator has a tension between the desire to do the research and activism that drew you to a university career in the first place and the desire to be an administrator. And for me, the pull to get back to research and activism was just extraordinarily powerful, and the moment seemed right given the crisis we're facing.
Tell me, in your view, what's wrong with Kevin Rudd's oft-declared standing of being unapologetically tough but humane?
Well, it's not humane, is the easy answer to your question. Individuals who have a well-founded fear of being persecuted are not migrants that stand in a queue. That's the basic principle. We've signed a treaty, indeed we helped to draft a treaty, that provides that when people are at risk of being persecuted, as many of the Sri Lankans are right now, they have the right to get out however they can get out, and they have the right to get to whatever state has signed the treaty that they can physically reach, and they have an ability to be protected there until and unless the harm ends. What the Rudd Plan provides is for individuals who were making their way toward a state party, Australia, to be diverted into Indonesia, which has refused over the years to be bound by any duty to protect refugees, and where we know basic conditions of detention violate even the one treaty it has signed, the Civil and Political Covenant, in terms of inhumane and degrading treatment. So to suggest that this is humane, much less law-abiding, is just a farce.
Would you concede that what's being played out now is better than was played out in Tampa in 2001 and in the years to follow, for that matter?
No, I wouldn't. I think what has changed fundamentally is the way that Australia treats those asylum seekers who do arrive here. There is no question but that the Labor government, and Minister Evans in particular, have shown extraordinary leadership in ending the indefinite detention in Australia and providing access to legal remedies. All of that is fabulous. What has not changed is our attitude to those who have yet to reach us. whether you're Labour, whether you're Liberal, the same basic concern to ensure that people who are entitled to travel here under international law are in fact diverted away from us remains the same.
So why do you think the debate, on both sides of politics for that matter, has played out as it has over the last couple of weeks? Are we still living, do you think, with the ghosts of Tampa, 2001?
I wonder if we need a cultural psychologist to answer that question. It's been suggested that this goes back to an innate fear of invasion. Australia perceives itself to be vulnerable, but the question arises why the Kiwis, sitting in a comparable position, nonetheless manage firmly to obey international law, do their duties, and indeed, as you'll recall, in the Tampa situation, actually picked up responsibilities from Australia. They haven't been invaded. They're not at fear of invasion. No other country has taken quite such an extreme position as Australia. Europeans don't like boat arrivals either, but their numbers are dramatically higher than anything Australia's ever seen. And yet they are somehow now struggling to find honest ways to share responsibilities and burdens as among themselves as an alternative to getting away from the deterrent strategy. Australia has yet to show comparable leadership in finding an affirmative way to protect rights even while managing flows.
And yet to show some honesty as well?
I think that's right. I think we're using legal rhetoric in a disingenuous fashion when we suggest that there is somehow an illegitimacy in people at risk of being persecuted, fleeing and coming to us. That's just incorrect. When we suggest that Indonesia is a worthy partner, when we know, despite Australian and UN efforts, that it has refused to be bound by the treaty, when we know that its foreign ministry said 2 days ago that their explicit policy is to prevent refugees from arriving in Indonesia, that is disingenuous to suggest that Indonesia is a reasonable partner. If we want to share responsibilities with other states that are bound by the same duties as we are, and to do so in a way that treats refugees fairly, that's perfectly fine. Refugees do not get the right to choose where they get to be protected permanently, but they do get the right to decide how to get out. They do get the right to have their claims fairly determined, and states can then fairly allocate the responsibility to protect them as among states that have agreed to be bound by the same duties.
Now, you've proposed a globalised system that would be, in fact, overseen by the UN. How exactly would that work?
Well, it basically plays out in much the way I've just described. There are no barriers to exit, no barriers to entry. That's the firm point. Second, it only involves states that have actually signed on to the obligations. You can't share responsibilities with people who have assumed none of them. You need effectively an insurance policy model of refugee protection so that more states will sign on. To take the easy example, India, sitting right next door to the Sri Lankan crisis, has steadfastly refused to sign the refugee treaty because it has never had a guarantee from the international community that anyone would share either the financial or human responsibilities that come out of protection. If we come up with a model that says individuals, wherever they land, wherever they can first get to be safe, will be received there. They will then have status determined. The decision about where to protect them for the duration of risk will be one made by the UN in consultation with states. It may not be their first choice. It may not be the place they went. Other states will provide residual solutions for those who can't go home after a reasonable period of temporary protection. States will share out the financial burdens to make this work, and the UN will oversee its quality. There's a model for this that's been on the table for 15 years now. It's not rocket science. We've done it in environmental law. We can do it in refugee law. What we need is some leadership. And what I've called for is, instead of an Indonesia solution, we need an Australia solution. We want a seat on the Security Council. We want to exercise global leadership. Here's an opportunity to do it. Stand up for human dignity in a managed, orderly fashion, perfectly consistent with the fair go philosophy that underlies this country.
Professor James Hathaway, thanks very much for your time.
You're most welcome.